The European Union's trade links with Israel come under the spotlight in Brussels today as EU foreign ministers meet. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has urged the EU to suspend its association agreement with Israel, though that is a move unlikely to succeed, with Israel supporters in the bloc, including Germany, likely to veto it. But a partial trade freeze previously floated by Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič could materialise as European countries become increasingly assertive in their criticism of Israel. And the EU is also mulling sanctions of extremist settlers. Charlotte Lamb has more.
A key EU-Israel agreement is under discussion in Luxembourg as tensions deepen between member states and Israel. And Spain's Prime Minister is leading calls to terminate the association agreement.
And a government that violates international law and therefore violates the principles and values of the European Union cannot be a partner of the European Union.
Attitudes among a number of EU countries have hardened over Israel's conduct in Gaza, where strikes continue despite a fragile ceasefire. They worsened after its latest military offensive and ground invasion of Lebanon, part of Israel's wider conflict with Iran alongside the US, and have been further strained by the passing of a new law effectively introducing the death penalty for Palestinians accused of terrorist murders. So what is the EU-Israel Association Agreement? Signed in 1995, it came into effect in the year 2000 as the legal basis for EU-Israel relations. It sets the framework for political and economic cooperation, including free trade across key sectors like industry and agriculture. And Article 2 of the text says the agreement was established on respect for human rights and democratic principles. Principles the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights accuses Israel of consistently breaching.
The EU cannot credibly claim to uphold human rights while sustaining preferential trade with a state whose conduct has been found by multiple international bodies as amounting to genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes.
The EU is Israel's largest trading partner. This graphic shows the millions of euros some member states spent in exports to Israel in 2024, with Germany far ahead of the others. Amnesty International has launched a petition targeting leaders in Germany and Italy, countries campaigners say could sway a decision to suspend the deal. Both have seen relations with Israel strain in recent weeks.
And for more on this, I can welcome Maya Sion-Tzidkiyahu, Director of the Israel-Europe Relations Programme at the Mitvim Institute and lecturer at the Hebrew University European Forum in Jerusalem. Good morning, Maya, and thank you very much for joining us. How closely will Israel be watching today's meeting in Brussels?
Good morning. The diplomats in Israel and the foreign minister of Israel will be watching very closely. Europe has been, the second most important entity or ally of, I wouldn't say ally, but, partner of Israel from economic perspective. It's the first. Also, from security perspective, there are very important relations, and you describe it very very well. The agricultural relations, the 70% of the flights going out of Israel goes to Europe, so it's definitely a very important partner of Israel.
Now, Israel, particularly under Benjamin Netanyahu, has been largely dismissive of criticism from Europe, viewing it as much less important than the support it gets from the United States. But is this attitude perhaps a bit misplaced?
I believe it is definitely misplaced. You have to take into consideration that the Prime Minister deals mostly with the United States, and it is the Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, who deals with Europe, with the EU and the other European countries. And yes, but this attitude has, it's a very long attitude of Netanyahu towards Israel that is lasting for more than a decade. And that comes from European former steps against Israel, be it the linkage, which means that there is no upgrade of the agreements as long as what used to be the Middle East peace process would not advance. That was a decision taken in 2008, 2009. Then, there's a series of steps that the EU has taken against the government of Israel, or conditioned the relations with Israel, depending on what's going on with the Palestinians. And Netanyahu has been a master in thwarting the EU decision-making against Israel along the years after some decisions were passed. And now it's a struggle. It's a very tough struggle because the public opinion in Europe has turned against Israel for quite a while. And now we see governments in Europe turning against the government of Israel.
Now, Spain's Pedro Sanchez is urging the EU to suspend its association agreement with Israel. That is probably unlikely to come to pass, but there could be a partial suspension. What might the repercussions of that be for Israel?
So let me just say that Sanchez is indeed the normative voice of Europe, but there is the geopolitical voice of Europe that has been growing along the recent years. And I think the later will win eventually, especially when it comes to, as you said, the suspension of the association agreement, this unanimity, and there will not be unanimity for that. But for the other measures that require a qualified majority voting, here we see the Italian stance is not as resilient as it was before, and that's a very disturbing signal to Israel. And that's definitely something that the foreign minister has to take into consideration and the whole government. So I'm not sure. Look, today is Memorial Day in Israel. We commemorate the memory of over 2,500 soldiers that were killed along since the establishment of the State of Israel. So, it's a symbolic timing. I don't think any of that would pass. What's more likely to pass in the future is the sanctions against violent settlers that Viktor Orban, Hungary, was vetoing. And then with the qualified majority voting, so suspension of only parts of the association agreement, like the trade issue, so inflicting customs on Israel. If it requires a qualified majority voting, I think, that would be a struggle. For the time being, the diplomats that I'm speaking to from the Israeli and from the European side don't see that coming. So despite the fact that Meloni has shifted and signaled a negative attitude, more negative attitude towards the government of Israel, I think when it comes to this voting, there'll still be a blocking minority in the EU blocking those measures.
Now, the EU is, as we've said, Israel's biggest trading partner. What sort of leverage can it bring to bear on Israel in the event of any particular suspension?
If there will be a suspension of the trade parts, then it means that there will be customs on Israeli export to the EU. That amounts to about 1 billion euros per year. It's quite a significant amount, and that depends very much on the business, on each business, to see whether it takes it out of business, whether the trade agreements they have with the other companies in Europe, does that makes them less profitable, and that has a bearing. But the customs would amount on average to about 4%. It's not a significant amount, allegedly, but again, it's a business-to-business decision. But it sends a very, very strong political signal. I think that is very disturbing for Israel. For decades, Netanyahu, when he was finance minister decades ago, was saying, Israel has to not put all the trade eggs at the one basket. We need to diversify our trade. And indeed, Israel has managed to diversify to some extent to Asia and to other countries on continents. But the EU is still, for many, many years, is the biggest trading partner. So that's going to be a major, major challenge for Israeli economy nowadays. But again, I don't see this measure going forward. But maybe one note. On the 20th of May last year, the Foreign Affairs Council did pass a decision to review the association agreement, but eventually no step was taken. But what happened was that the Netherlands was the one pushing for this measure, for this decision to be taken at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels. And the mood shifted while the discussion was taking place within the room. So we do need to follow very carefully because the mood is shifting against Israel.
And now, on a separate matter to trade, Israel has faced pushback from countries in Europe in the areas of culture and sport, with several nations boycotting this year's European Song Contest because of Israel's presence. And Ireland has so far unsuccessfully tried to introduce a motion with UEFA to expel Israel from its football competitions. How seriously are these attempts being taken in Israel?
Very seriously. And, it's a bit of maybe an irony, because the Israelis are much less aware of the economic implications that EU-Israel relations would have if the suspension of the trade part would take place. But they are very, I think, agitated when it comes to the Eurovision contest and when it comes to football and those issues. And, Israeli diplomacy has a very uphill struggle against those decisions, but so far it has been successful. So we'll have to see. But definitely, this is something the Israeli public is following much closer. The media is reporting on that. So, yeah, there's an irony of how, what symbols against, the real life of economic life here in Israel.
Thank you very much for that, Maya Sion-Tzidkiyahu, Director of the Israel-Europe Relations Programme at the Mitvim Institute.
Thank you.